Hi everyone, welcome. These buckets that you see right here, labeled buckets number 3, 4, and 5, have, as you might be able to see in the little tiny label on them, they've got ENC worms living in them. Those ENCs are European night crawlers. That's my abbreviation for European night crawler. And they've been in these bins for 48 days now. And over the course of those 48 days, they've been fed 4 times. And that last feeding, which was 10 days ago, was a somewhat experimental material. I took some corn cobs, and the corn cobs were left in water to soak for perhaps a week and a half. I don't remember the exact amount of time, but they were given ample amount of time to soak thoroughly and become really damp, because if you've ever fed corn cob to your worm bins, you'll know it's one of those materials that takes a really long time. So besides checking out on the corn cobs, I've got some leaves here to use as bedding, as well as an assortment of fruits and veggies. So very similar to what you see in this jar right here. These corn cobs that have also been soaking for some time now. We're going to be checking in on those corn cobs right in here in these yellow buckets. So I'm going to put on a glove, point the camera down to see what's going on in these systems, and we're going to get to work. In any other case, I would not expect a whole lot of progress on corn cobs after only 10 days in a worm bin, but the soaking, I suspect, might have softened the material up enough to enable worms to more readily access the material and possibly take a bite out of it. So I am very curious to find out what's happening down here in this system. It is so nice how the material in this system is so nice and fluffy. You could see we deployed the last feeding with a good amount of prepared bedding. The bedding we used last time was my shredded paper and cardboard mix versus the leaves that we're going to apply today. Well, the leaves I really imagined as more of a top covering. What I thought about placing beneath the food was just a napkin. It's a pretty large napkin. I thought that if I could unfold it and then kind of wrinkle it up a little bit, it would serve as a nice foundation onto which we can drop today's assortment of fruits and veggies. So I'm kind of just using this as an opportunity to go down deep and till up the material that's down low. In the past, when I've run buckets like this, it's pretty difficult to reach the bottom once the material starts stacking up. But here in these bins, you know, being less than 7 weeks old, it's still easy enough just to get to the bottom and spin the material around a little bit, check out how it's doing. So let's not prolong the inevitable much longer. There were 2 corn cobs, or 2 halves of a corn cob, placed into each system, so that would be an entire corn cob right there. So I just split it in half, and well, I mean, not a whole lot going on here yet. There was one occasion in the past where I remember corn being placed into the systems. This little guy looks like he's burrowed down into the corn cob, because you know, down in the middle of the corn cob there's that nice soft inside. So yeah, back to the corn cob story. There was a time when I took some corn, and I believe that corn actually had all the kernels on it still. And whatever it was about that corn, whether it was the fact that it was given to them with the kernels on it, or maybe there was just something about that corn cob that was just much easier for them to eat, the stuff seemed like it broke down in virtually no time, which seemed really unusual to me, because my typical expectation of corn cobs in the worm bins is that it's going to take quite a bit of time. So I didn't really know what to expect. I kind of must admit that I sort of had high hopes that perhaps soaking the corn cobs would result in much speedier breakdown. But I didn't really get my hopes up too high. One of the viewers did make a really interesting suggestion, though, which I was thinking about trying with that next batch of corn cobs that have been soaking, and they've been soaking for longer now than the ones that we're looking at in here today. That person's suggestion was to attempt freezing the corn cobs after they've been sitting in the water for all that time. So not only enabling the water to infiltrate all the material and to soak it through thoroughly, but also then freezing the corn cobs. Because as many of you know, and many of you also do, the freezing of foods that go into the worm bins seems to accelerate the breakdown process. Most things, if they've been frozen and they've been left to thaw, they just turn to mush, basically. So I definitely like that idea. So I've been thinking that perhaps the next test with corn cobs might add the extra facet of us going ahead and freezing the thoroughly soaked corn cobs. So I'm not expecting much different results in buckets number 4 and 5, but over here in bucket number 3, it was interesting to check in to see how the wormies are coming along over here on day 48, receiving their 5th feeding. So, as discussed, we're coming in with a nice top dressing of leaves. And you know, I was just outside to replenish my supply of leaves, and it seems to me like what I have remaining out there is dwindling fast. It almost seems to me like if I were to fill up this box perhaps 2 or 3 more times, that would really be the end of my supply of leaves. So I might start being a little bit more sparing with the deployment of leaves into my system, so that I can perhaps enable the material to last a little bit longer. But I don't know, we'll have to see. I've got shredders. I can definitely shred paper and cardboard and have an ample supply of lovely bedding to use in my worm bin feedings. So let's proceed to bucket number 4. So now I do start to get into a little bit of a cookie cutter mode when I'm dealing with groups of systems that are managed together. So I think we'll probably follow suit with my typical mode of operating, which is to just go at buckets number 4 and 5 with the expectation that we're just going to see more of the same as what we saw while we were checking in on bucket number 3. So unless we encounter something a little bit out of the ordinary, we'll just pick up the pace now and try to get these worm bin feedings, worm bucket feedings, completed. So, quick till of the outer edges, a quick extraction of the bedding that's down low, leads us to the food they got last time. Once again, we're noticing a couple worms that are working their way down to the core, burrowing through the ear of corn itself. So offhand, I just don't recall what I would typically expect to see as far as corn cob progress after only 10 days. After only 10 days, I would normally just expect to see virtually no progress. Here's another wormy hanging out on it, and I assume that at some point soon we'll start to see the breakdown of the core of these corn cobs, because the core is a little bit softer than the rest of the material that makes up the corn cob. I mean, corn cobs are definitely a tough, fibrous material. It's not too surprising that it takes the worms a good bit of time to eventually work their way through all that stuff. And I'm also interested in seeing what the freezing of the corn cobs after soaking them might do. In the past, I'm fairly certain I've already experimented with simply taking corn cobs and including them with the rest of my food supplies in my freezer, just putting them in the freezer to let them freeze and then eventually get fed to the worms after having been frozen, although just the fact that they're not a very juicy or moisture-laden material makes me suspect that the freezing doesn't really do much in terms of helping with the breakdown process. But I believe that putting corn cobs that have been thoroughly soaked through and through into the freezer, and then observing the breakdown of, corn cobs that have been handled that way could result in somewhat different results. So I suppose if there was an expectation of there being no difference, then I wouldn't even mention it or even consider trying it. But since it does seem like an interesting hypothesis, it seems like something worth trying. And since I've already got a collection of thoroughly soaked corn cob, it would be easy enough to simply place them in the freezer and give it a try. In fact, I probably would have frozen those corn cobs by now, in pursuit of an answer to that question in terms of what to expect in such an experiment, except I figured it would be interesting to just have that collection of corn cobs here visible to include in today's check-in as a illustration of what's going on. But perhaps the next step for those corn cobs is going to be the freezer, and then after that being fed to some systems to see what kind of output, what sort of results we get. It's almost like a process. Like the input is the stuff that you're including in the experiment, and then the output is the results. So in a way, I was sort of correct in what I said there. So many nice castings piling up here after only 48 days. I guess tomorrow, 49 days, will mark the 7th week in service. So it is pretty interesting how time flies. Time flies in the wormery when you're having fun. So look at me treating these corn cobs as old hat already. I just took that first piece and I simply set it aside without even looking at it. But here on this second piece, I'm seeing much the same. I'm seeing little worms kind of working their way in through the side of the corn cob, down into the core, nibbling their way into it. And I guess in future check-ins we'll get to see how the progress continues. I wouldn't want to discount the possibility of soaking being a helpful extra thing to include in the process, because perhaps it is going to speed up the breakdown. Oh boy. We've seen napkins like this before, provided from my mom's house. I asked her about the last example in terms of, hey, how come those corn cobs had how come those napkins had lipstick on them? And she identified 2 different people, so it's not certain exactly whose lipstick we're seeing there, but she helped narrow it down to 2 people. And I suspected that it would be one of her girlfriends, because she has her weekly dinner with the ladies, which I even get invited to sometimes. So my main role is to usually be the bartender and the busboy, or at least I try to help in those capacities if I can. Sometimes I'm even the chef when we do the Mexican pizzas. I like to do the knockoff Mexican pizza recipe, trying to mimic what you buy at a Taco Bell. So I think we're at the end now, feeding our yellow buckets. I wanted to include this nice generous portion of leaves as a top coating in these systems, because I am preparing to be away for a little while. So a lot of my systems, like the ones that I checked in on the other day, were cut loose on what I consider to be foraging, and the expectation there was that we'd be gone, or that we wouldn't even be checking in on those foraging bins for something in the neighborhood of 3 weeks. And even with these systems, it's quite likely that it'll be something in the neighborhood of about 2.5 weeks until the next time we check in on these. So it might be interesting to see what we end up with. Perhaps we'll see some progress on those corn cobs, but I'll tell you the truth, I'm not really holding my breath. I'll just wait and see. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.